Hello everyone, and welcome to Wine Business Monthly's annual Tasting Room Survey Results webinar. My name is Erin Kirschman, and I'm the Managing Editor of Wine Business Monthly.
My name's Andrew Adams. I'm the editor of the Wine Analytics Report, which is also part of the Wine Business Company.
We are so excited to have you here today because we're going to go through some data that hopefully will show you maybe things aren't as bad as it seems. We've seen a lot of headlines recently about layoffs in the tasting room closures, and just a general uneasiness about the state of the wine industry. But with this information, we're hoping you'll be able to better benchmark your business and decide how to move forward in a way that is profitable for you. Before we get started, I have to thank the team at Wine Business Analytics for gathering, crunching, and reviewing all of the data so that you have something reliable to benchmark your business against. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about the survey?
My pleasure. So Erin and our background is in journalism, but we're very lucky and we're privileged to work with the data scientists at Wine Business Analytics who are able to conduct a very rigorous, comprehensive, and accurate survey of the more than 11,000 wineries in the United States. That accuracy is powered by our winery database, which remains the most comprehensive and accurate accounting of wineries across North America. With those results and the accuracy we have, we're able to segment out by key winery regions on the West Coast and east of the Rockies, as well as by winery size, from the very smallest, producing fewer than 1,000 cases, to the very largest U.S. wineries, making more than 500,000 cases a year. And we're able to bolster that data with insights from experts in both the wine trade and the wine industry.
Yeah, we're very excited to have with us two guest speakers today who will give us some insight into what they're seeing on the ground in the tasting room as they go through and make their sales. So with us today is Kelly Mantell, Director of DTC Marketing and E-commerce at Harney Lane Vineyards, as well as Garrett Murphy, the founder of the Vintners Collective in Napa Valley. We'll be bringing them in throughout the broadcast to add their insight and opinion. So what do we think? Should we get into the data?
Let's get into it.
All right, our very first piece of information, the annual percent change in DTC sales in 2024. Now, it looks like a mixed bag at the beginning. You see some decreases, particularly in volume in Napa and in value in the rest of California. But there is a positive side to all of this, right? Even though we do see a decrease in volume, there is a hefty, almost 16% increase in value in Napa. And that's always a good thing to see. Even in the rest of California, we have an increase in the volume if value is not necessarily there. It looks a lot better than some of the headlines would suggest.
What really jumped out to me on this is you can see the difference in pricing, average pricing between Sonoma County and Napa County. What with the increase in volume on the Sonoma side, there still, unfortunately, was a decrease in the average total value, which is dollars. And then in volume, of course, is cases. In Napa, the volume was down, but the value was way up. And it really is an example of the pricing power of Napa and how it is different in a lot of ways than the rest of the industry. You know, in the analytics report, we also look at shipments, DTC shipments through our partnership with Sovo Ship Compliant. And it was in the last 12 months through April, looking at Napa shipments by price, those wines with an average price of more than $200 accounted for just about 161,000 cases. But those cases were worth more than $650 million. Now, in terms of the total shipment market, we have seen a consistent decline on the volume side in that has carried over into this year. One of the things we're going to be looking at is what's changed in terms of people perhaps picking up more of their club purchases or club shipments, and also carrying out their tasting room purchases. That might have changed as shipping costs there has been no ease up in the increase in shipping costs, which has been another burden on the DTC market. And then lastly, we should definitely call out the success of east of the Rockies there, the only major region, well, except for the Central Coast too, but it's very exciting to see a major region like the east of the Rockies see both a gain in value and volume. As you know, so many burgeoning wine industries out there continue to connect with both their own local and regional audiences, but maybe are also building national reputations and bringing in a wider market of wine tourism.
Absolutely. We have to really look at east of Rockies because they are making such strides in capturing their local wine enthusiasts. We have a lot of lessons we could learn from them out here on the West Coast. Now, that leads me perfectly into our next slide, which talks about tasting room visitation. Across the West Coast, we've been hearing a lot of stories that visitation is down, it's bad. We're just not getting the types of tourists or even locals who want to come in and make purchases. So now if you look at the median annual tasting room visitors, yes, there are some decreases, but we're also seeing some increases as well, especially in, of course, east of the Rockies and in Napa. Napa is actually up 15.9% in visitation since last year. Probably poaching a little bit of that visitation from Sonoma. We know that Sonoma wineries and Sonoma County in general rebounded from the pandemic a little faster than Napa. It was seen as a more budget-friendly, easier, family-friendly kind of region to visit, and so that bounced back quickly once things started opening up again. We know that Napa had its struggles, but in the last year, you've seen a big concerted effort from the Napa Valley wineries and hotels to really bring back those tourists. A lot of hotels have lowered their prices. Hearing all of the news and the headlines and all of the Napa is too expensive comments. They took that to heart, lowered their hotel room rates, and now we're starting to see a little bit of a bounce back.
That's great. It's great. You know, I think the overall picture that we see here is not a surprise to a lot of folks working in tasting rooms, unfortunately. That increase in Napa is very good to see, very positive, and also east of the Rockies retaining and holding on the visitation rate that they had seen in the previous year. You know, it's an ongoing process across so many sectors beyond even just wine, the normalization from the COVID times. And now that is, when wine country was one of the few and very popular travel destinations for a variety of consumers, that's normalizing back to trends. But unfortunately, it's running into kind of the wider trend of economic anxiety among U.S. consumers. And so that might be a continuing challenge through the rest of the year. So.
Yeah, speaking of economic uncertainty, which I hope I don't have to use that phrase too much more for the next couple of years. But in looking at places that people who are a little bit more budget conscious would want to visit, Lodi is a great alternative. And it is now my pleasure to bring in our very first speaker, Kelly Mantell at Harney Lane Vineyards. Kelly, can you tell us, have you seen a decline in visitation like it suggests? Lodi is considered part of the rest of California and is down about 10% in visitation. Are you seeing that as well?
Well, Aaron, we are seeing a decrease like many other regions. I think your data is very much in line with some of the other data points that we're looking at, including the U.S. Travel Association reporting, I think, international travel down about 15%. So we're definitely seeing fewer international travelers. But we're seeing lots of folks still from the greater Sacramento region and East Bay even. I think many Americans still are kind of embracing this fear of some economic challenges and headwinds, so to speak. And I think there's still kind of a general assumption that visiting a wine region or going wine tasting is expensive. And in many cases and in many regions, it is. But not all regions and tasting experiences are created equal. But I think the problem is that just consumers are confused of that. They don't know the difference. But I think Lodi really is that really great alternative for a consumer that's maybe a little more cost conscious.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about the consumer or the guest who is making their way into your tasting room? What kind of experiences are they looking for? What's their wine knowledge like?
We see a really great mix of traffic in the tasting room. We're very fortunate to have the majority of our visitors and foot traffic from members and within a good 40 to 60 mile radius of Lodi. So we're fortunate on that front. We're seeing a lot of folks really looking for a casual experience, something that they can do without a reservation. Kind of that old school walk in, visit multiple tasting rooms within a day. So we're wanting to really embrace that and lean into that here in Lodi. We often get calls from consumers out of the area with concern that they're visiting the area, they don't have a reservation. What can we do? And we're very pleased to say that we've got multiple tasting opportunities and experiences available and accessible without reservation.
Yeah, I know that's great. We're seeing a lot of that here in the Napa and Sonoma Valley. If you drive through Highway 12, for example, every winery has a little sign out that says walk-ins welcome. Are you seeing that same thing happening in Lodi?
I think we're seeing a little more of that signage, which I think is needed in this day and age. I think we flipped the narrative on the consumer where visiting wine country used to be walking in without a reservation, and now I think most consumers assume that you have to have a reservation everywhere you go. So the roadside signage I think is great. Let's continue to do that to drive some walk-in traffic, but we're doing our best to elevate that narrative through lots of other marketing and other means in our region to help ensure we receive that daily traveler.
Absolutely. Now, tell me a little bit more about this marketing. It's one thing to get the consumer into the tasting room, to get that foot traffic. How do you keep in touch with them afterward and ensure that there's a sale even after they've left the tasting room?
Sure. Well, we're a nimble team here at Harney Lane, but we are leveraging the power of automation and technology to follow up by email, by text. We push very hard and train our staff to gather contact information in the tasting room and at tasting experiences. We know the value of an email address and a phone number to follow up by text. In 2025, if you don't have a welcome email drip set up, you're really leaving money on the table. So we've invested heavily in that kind of technology to ensure that we're following up. And also asking for that second sale. We see a lot of first-time visitors in many parts of the year. Over 50% of who we see is that first-time visitor. But we also know that about 80% of first-time consumers won't make that second purchase. So we're investing a lot in that follow-up communication via email and outbound telephone sales and outreach to ensure that we remind them of the experience they had here on the estate and invite them back through various means.
That's great, Kelly. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Long time ago, I had the privilege of working at the newspaper in lovable, livable Lodi, and I'm just thrilled to continue to see how things have developed there to such a high degree. And I wish you the best of luck and continued success. And we'll keep talking later. But now I live in Napa, and it's my pleasure to bring on Garrett Murphy, who's the founder of the Vintners Collective Tasting Room in beautiful downtown Lodi. Or sorry, still had Lodi in the mind, downtown Napa. So thank you, Garrett, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
And if you don't mind, if you just talk a little bit about what you do at the Collective Tasting Room before we get into it.
What I use myself, I greet people after almost 25 years of doing this. I make sure that I'm there for new and customers that have been coming with us for a very long time. I greet, I room around. It's always nice to have the owner in the tasting room. If you don't have the owner, it's a good idea to have your winemaker, your assistant winemaker. That younger generation wants to see that, and the experience is very important to them, and the conviviality is very important to them. So it's what I do all
Fantastic.
day, and I
And
enjoy
you
doing it.
and you guys are pouring wines from multiple different small producers in Napa Valley, right?
Right, we have 18 small producers. They make between 2 barrels to 10 barrels for each label that they produce. So we're garagiste. We're very small.
Excellent. And have you
We
enjoyed so
represent.
far this year a bit of that bump in tasting room traffic that our survey found in Napa County?
Yes, that's true. This year has started a little slow in January, and then it really took off. So hopefully it continues in that trend.
Excellent. And how beneficial or important is referrals or word of mouth marketing to driving that traffic?
Well, for as long as we've been in business, I always told my staff that is a relationship, with your client is like with a friend. And if you don't have that, well, you're gonna miss on that long-term relationship, the nurturing of your client, because just like Kelly said, the most important is the purchase that happens after their visit. That is extremely important. We're always in touch, just like a friend. Just letters, cards, phone calls. I mean, every day. It's not something you do once in a while. You do it every day. You follow up with the person that came to visit, and you just like if it was a friend. Hey, it was so nice meeting you. It was nice hanging out with you. And then you call them to make sure they receive their wines, and then you follow up later on saying, "How did you like the wines?" And then you follow up and say, "Do you need more of that wine?" So it takes a lot of work to make sure you stay in business and that your clients trust you and they like you.
That's excellent. And other wineries in other regions that might want to build or emulate that type of mutually beneficial approach to driving visitor traffic, what would you recommend for them to start or to do?
Hire people that have empathy, and extreme knowledge about the winemaking process, because that younger generation that we're trying to attract, wants that. They want really to hear that you care, that it's more than just a beverage in your glass. That it's a story. You're offering a wine that has soul, and for this you need to explain why, and for that you need to have very knowledgeable staff that have a high level of empathy. Because when you tell somebody, when you tell your staff, hey, I want you to develop a wonderful relationship with your customer because that's how we're gonna grow. If they don't have the ability, and it's difficult to teach, not impossible. And that's why I'm in my tasting room, all the time. I want them to see, how I treat my customers, my friends, and I want them to emulate that. And so that's something important, I think. And then you have to also adapt with the new, the boomers are not buying much anymore. The Gen X are buying in greater quantity, but they don't come as often. I suspect it's because they work a lot. And the millennials come more often, but buy a little less. So you just have to adapt and create an environment that makes those millennials come back often.
That's excellent information, Garrett. And I want to come back to you a little bit later as we talk about millennials, Gen X, and Gen Z, and some of the things that we can be doing in the tasting room to capture their attention and their dollars. For now, though, that is the perfect segue into our next slide, which talks about conversion rates, right? Once we've gotten them into the tasting room, are we doing a good job converting them to Wine Club, to a sale, or to the mailing list? And I want to point out the mailing list specifically because we've already talked about this in the webinar. It is imperative that every time somebody comes in, whether they've made the reservation or they're just a guest tagging along, we are capturing their email because that is the strongest way to make a continued sale and to build a relationship with someone after they've left. We're noticing that mailing list conversion is down this year. And this is actually something that Liz Mercer at Wise Academy was relaying to us as well. She said that the asks are down as well. So if it's a piece of paper on the table or training the tasting room staff to ask for the email, that's going to be really key moving forward. Some other things that we're noticing with this one, we're seeing that even if Wine Club is up, sales is down, but if sales is up, Wine Club's down, it's really kind of playing into this story that we've been hearing a lot of economic uncertainty and budgeting, right? It's hard to commit to a wine club when you are unsure if you're going to have a job in the next 6 months. We are hearing stories about layoffs, particularly in the tech industry and other industries closer to wine regions. And so, as a consumer saying, oh, well, 3 or 4 times a year, I'll get a package that's about $300. We don't know if that's $290 or $390, and that extra $100 can make a big difference. So it's good to see that even if we aren't able to get people to commit to that wine club, sales are going up, at least in the tasting room.
Indeed. And if you look across the board, major regions here, Napa, Sonoma County, Central Coast, rest of California, Pacific Northwest, east of the Rockies, and all the U.S., it's great to see that generally all the regions are above 60% in scoring a sale in the tasting room based on whomever walks in. So that's 6 out of 10. That's great. Obviously, could be a lot better, could be better, but it's a great place to start from, and it's really encouraging to see that level of sales in the tasting room. And we also ask about collecting information, and it's vital, as has already been pointed out, to do that. And when we ask how and when during the visit wineries ask for that email, it's pretty interesting. But one of the things that really jumped out for me was in the east of the Rockies, 18% of the wineries surveyed don't collect that information. And that's, as someone has already said, that's money left on the table. So really, and I think people do expect it, and it also is very encouraging in terms of text outreach that people are still a bit open to that, and they like hearing from wineries, even over the phone too. And also, is there some type of incentive, a small token gesture of appreciation? Of course, being compliant with all local, state, and federal laws and what wineries can do, but a corkscrew for an email, I mean, people love corkscrews.
I would do it.
Yeah, there you go. And it always blows my mind the shocking number or share of U.S. households that don't have a corkscrew. So something to think about in terms of getting that vital information about people who visit you.
That's not my house. I think I have 16.
Yeah, me
if
too.
anybody wants one for your email, I'll trade you. All right, let's move on to wine club acquisition and attrition in 2024, since we're already starting to talk about conversion to the wine club. Sonoma's attrition rate was down this year, which is really exciting to see that people are kind of in that region holding on to their wine clubs. Maybe they're coming a little less frequently, or they're a little less than their Napa counterparts, but that's always something good to hear. Across the board, acquisition and average total members are down. That's nothing unexpected, but they aren't huge decreases either.
So if you look at attrition rate and you look at acquisition rate, if that attrition rate is bigger, if that's a bigger percentage than the acquisition rate, then it's a decline in club members. And so here again, east of the Rockies, outperforming the West Coast in terms of gaining wine club members, which is fantastic. And then another big or interesting finding in this year's survey was the ongoing trend of the smallest wineries seeing some of the biggest gains. If you look at wineries making fewer than 1,000 cases, their acquisition rate was double that of the attrition rate. And that is very encouraging. I am a bit concerned that for some of these wineries, they might be seeing that some of that decline in shipments we're seeing in the shipment channel, and so that means they've had to either start providing more hospitality services, or maybe they're just complementing that shipment and wine club business with a bit more open or more tasting opportunities at their estates.
Yeah, and you see some interest in collectives as well. A lot of wineries are starting to band together to rent out a tasting room space, as rent in most of these places is very high. It's too much for somebody producing less than 1,000 cases to do on their own. But if you band together with a few others, similar to what Garrett is doing with the Vintners Collective, it does make it a little bit more manageable. And it is good to see these types of rates for the smaller producers. Something that I'm hearing on a lot of podcasts is that founder-led, winemaker-led brands are bucking a lot of the trends, particularly with younger demographics. They like to know who's in charge of the business, who's running it day to day. They like to see that CEO or president continuing to have boots on the ground, to put in the hard work and sweat equity. And so we're seeing some of that in the data as well, which is really good to see. All right. With that, I'd love to jump into our median order values in 2024. We've talked about conversion to a wine club or a sale, but what are those worth to all of these regions? So here we see that actually the Central Coast is doing really well, particularly with on-site events. It's good to see that they're bringing in new people. This is something that East of the Rockies has done particularly well over the last few decades. We were kind of talking in an editorial meeting the other day, and we heard that one, I think it was Virginia winery owner said, "Oh, I don't even have to market my business. I just have weddings all the time." And I know there's some permitting issues that we can't do here on the West Coast, but a bride and a groom, if they have their wedding at your winery, they're going to join the wine club at least for a few years, or hopefully for as long as the marriage exists. And by having all of those guests there, they're tasting your wines, you can convert them easily to wine club. And that's what he was saying. A lot of tasting room or winery business is happening with events now. People want to go somewhere and have an experience and have time to connect and have fun with their friends. Right? Kelly was saying that earlier today, that they just want to go and be casual. Events are a really great way to boost that on-site event average order value, right? If people are having fun, having a drink or two, making that sale is going to be just a little bit easier.
That's very true. And another element or feature of our survey that makes it so robust and hopefully useful for everyone is that it's informed by data from Community Benchmark, which, as the name suggests, provides really great benchmarking data by aggregating collective anonymous DTC data. And in this year so far, what they've seen is that there are a good chunk, I think close to 40% of wineries that work with them are seeing growth in DTC. And one of the main drivers of that growth are wineries that do more than just tasting room and wine club sales. So that does mean the events, it could mean telesales, really active digital marketing, but we really need to be mindful of the revenue potential from those other marketing efforts, what your costs are going into it, and really does it pencil out? Because an event can be great and can drive a lot of engagement, but if you're expecting to recoup all your costs from that event in wine sales, it might be a challenge. But you might then be able to spread that out over better engagement and online sales. So really, it's a challenging time, and that wineries need to really be active across multiple channels in the DTC space, but also be very mindful of the costs of those efforts, and are they working? Take a hard look at those efforts and see, was it worth it?
Yeah, and events, as we know, Wine Business Monthly puts on several events each year. They are not easy, but they bring so much joy and connection and networking, and that's something that we've been missing a lot lately. Given the pandemic, we hear the term loneliness epidemic quite frequently. If you can connect your brand to connection, to being that friendly wine sommelier, to that friendly wine tasting room employee, that will lead to a lot of success.
We're moving on into a big question about tasting room fees,
Yes.
Particularly here in Sonoma County and Napa County. And it appears from this year's survey that wineries in Napa County did get a bit of a message, as about 18% did say they created a lower price tier and it brought in new visitors. Other regions, they tried it and it didn't work, particularly in the Pacific Northwest and the Central Coast. That is a bit concerning, or it might be helpful in that it's less of a tasting fees question, but more of a perhaps total trip cost, because it's a bit more of an effort to get further down the Willamette Valley or up the Central Coast from places like LA. So again, something to think about. Is it really the fee or other costs, other considerations by potential visitors?
Absolutely. One thing not shown on this slide is the average price for a basic tasting or an elevated experience. We're still seeing increases here. In Napa, the average price for a basic tasting is $65, and for an elevated experience, that's $125. To Andrew's point, if it's costing you $400, $500 a night at a hotel in Napa, that does make it a little bit tougher to stomach or to visit as many wineries as you would have liked. But we are seeing that across regions, particularly in the rest of California, Pacific Northwest, East of Rockies. We are seeing slight increases to the tasting fee. Part of that, of course, is that the cost of goods is going up, cost of labor is going up, and we can't just provide as much wine as we would love to everybody. We do have to recoup some of that cost. But in terms of just getting people into your winery, into your tasting room, maybe it's too soon to tell if the lower tasting fee is working or not. We'll have to keep asking this question in the next survey to be able to see if it holds true. All right, with that, I'd love to bring back Kelly because I have some questions about this. You've obviously capitalized a little bit on the fact that Napa has this reputation for a high price. Have you considered lowering your tasting fees? Do you see others doing it? Has it worked?
Sure. Great question. And love Napa Valley and love the experience, and many are worth the price paid. So kudos to what's happening in Napa and Sonoma. But our tasting fees here in the heart of Lodi wine country are between $20 and $50, which we feel are appropriate for the market that we're in. I wouldn't say that we're considering adjusting pricing overall, although we've played with dynamic pricing strategies during the week to drive some off-peak visitation. But I think that price range of 20 to 50 is fairly appealing to especially a new wine consumer or a younger consumer who one is a little more cost conscious. And they also don't know what to expect. I think it's maybe a challenge for a 25-year-old to spend $100 or $125 for a tasting when they don't know what they're going to get out of it. A $20 ask or a $40 ask, I think, is a little more palatable. We're really looking and leaning into our core narrative here in Lodi, and that's that we're welcoming, that we're an authentic atmosphere and environment where we can meet every consumer at the point that where they are in their wine journey. So if it's a very casual $20 tasting bellying up to the bar, then let it be that. But we also see the consumers on a daily basis that want the seated, guided, more elevated tasting experience. So we offer those too. I think what's important is that you have a diverse set of tasting offerings for the various types of guests you have.
I love what you said about being welcoming, providing that type of hospitality that makes you feel like you're part of the family or friends. What are some of the tactics that you're employing to make sure that you stay welcoming and hospitable, but also try to bump up that average order value or wine club conversion?
Certainly. Well, I think it starts with being human, having empathy. Every consumer, regardless of industry, whether you're walking into a tasting room or a grocery store, wants to be seen, wants to be greeted, wants to be welcomed warmly. I think we miss this a lot. I think our industry misses this a lot by the sophistication that we try to maintain. But I think people want a genuine connection. So asking how they are and how their trip was and where they're from and what their interests are shows that we have interest in them. I think we leverage technology to do a little bit of research on our customer, where they're coming from, what their interests are, what they've purchased before. We look them up on LinkedIn and Instagram, find out what their personal interests or affinities are too. We want to make them feel special, and I think you set that groundwork for a wow experience, and you're far more likely to get a really great customer and sale and hopefully a wine club member out of them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love it when I walk in and somebody already kind of knows that I work in the wine industry and they're not going to go through the basics of, we matured this in oak and that gives off vanilla characters. And I go, I know, I've written enough barrel stories over the years. But one thing that I have been hearing at Wine Business Monthly is that comped tastings may actually be hurting the sale. Do you participate in any sort of, buy 2 bottles or purchase X amount of dollars and have your tasting fee comped? Do you see that working? What are the advantages and disadvantages?
Sure. We have a few tasting experiences where the fee can be waived with a purchase. One of those being the tasting experience at the tasting bar, which I think is appropriate given the nature of that tasting experience. But I think we need to be more creative and innovative on what we comp, how we comp and when we comp. And I don't think it always has to be the tasting fee or with a bottle purchase. I think there's alternative ways, whether that's in them purchasing a particular SKU or purchasing another tasting experience for a second visit so we can get them on site for a second time. But I think in general, offering comped fees with a purchase in general is working. But I think, of course, we've got to be careful with how and when we're doing that and being creative with what the incentive is for a sale. We don't always have to give away the farm to earn the sale.
I would be so happy with Wine Club if the incentive was free shipping, but I also know how much shipping costs. So I won't ask for it, but I've heard of some wineries doing that, and it's something that's made me really happy. I would be a member of so many more if I didn't have to pay the extra $70 in shipping to get that case. Well, thank you, Kelly. That was really helpful, and you actually did a really nice segue into our next topic, talking about some of the younger audiences.
Thank you, Erin.
Let's go to our next slide. So how are tasting rooms trying to attract a younger customer in 2024? Not surprisingly, social digital marketing is the most frequent response from all of our winery participants. I sometimes wonder at the efficacy of this, and I know I'm not the only one. A lot of experts in this industry kind of wonder too. It's hard to do, right? Social media, digital marketing is not an easy field. And it's hard to do it with some authenticity to the brand. It doesn't help that companies like Meta are constantly changing their algorithm and their advertising policies. Visibility has been a huge issue lately. It's felt a little bit like an echo chamber. You know, you're doing the ads that have always worked, and now all of a sudden, no one's seeing it. So I think it's really important that while we're also doing social and digital marketing, it needs to happen, that wineries are starting to look at other ways to help attract a younger consumer. And my favorite of these is looking and adjusting the wine club offering. Andrew, I'm sure you've heard this too. Subscription models are becoming very popular. These types of consumers love the transparency. They love knowing that they're going to get a certain number of bottles that they already like and love at a frequency that's appropriate for them. I think that's probably the smartest way that we're starting to attract these consumers. I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
I totally agree. You know, subscriptions, the ability for people to engage with the brand, the wines that they want. You know, one thing I hear a lot is if building an engaged and effective relationship is showing the consumer, show me that you know me, and it provides that flexibility. Again, provides the personal touch to their club membership, you know, and they're really, obviously there's room to grow in terms of the younger consumers. It's something the wine industry has known for a couple decades now, and this market is really kind of forcing wineries to focus on this. And I think there is obvious potential, and there is good growth. You know, another survey that WineBusiness Analytics did of U.S. wineries, we've done it now twice in a row, and when we asked wineries to break down their average tasting room traffic by age, you know, Gen Z, Millennial, Boomer, Gen X, and mature, it was interesting to see that the share of Gen Z has grown quite significantly. You know, small to still small, but still very much there was growth there. And particularly what jumped out at me was, again, it was in the east of the Rockies category and in the rest of California region. And I think, you know, as Kelly was describing, those wineries there can offer a chance for younger people to connect with wine in a way that's approachable in terms of both their budget and also in terms of the experience that they might be looking for. As you know, as young people, they might be very well disinclined to go to the regions where their parents and older siblings go. I did just think it's interesting. You know, you can see the bars there on nothing. We're doing nothing,
we're always going to see that. That's always going to be the case.
And I think the way you can look at it, though, is you don't want to pander to young people, because that will come off as very inauthentic, and you could miss quite badly there. So stay always across everything that we're talking about in terms of digital marketing, events, outreach, and trying to create a tasting experience that really is engaging to younger people is you have to stay true to your brand and also to your founding vision of the winery, because that inauthenticity will be more detrimental to your brand than high fees in the tasting experience.
Absolutely. And I'd like to bring back Garrett, because Garrett, at the Vintners Collective, you see a lot of millennials in particular, as well as some Gen Z and Gen X. And I'm wondering, what specifically about Vintners Collective is appealing to them?
Um, so Venus Collective is a co-op for small producers, and that is already very attractive to a millennial. And they like the idea again, it's very important to them that you care about the environment, that they talk about natural wines. The difference today with greeting that new generation is to sort of you have more teaching to do. They don't know enough, but they want to know. Versus, a Gen X or a boomer, they seeked you out because they knew that you had this winemaker, or you had this source of fruit of that they love, and this particular vineyard, and so they would seek this out. The newer generation comes in and they are, an open book, and you just have to take time and enjoy sharing, the experience of enjoying a beautiful wine tasting, and talk about, how do you make wine? It's always natural. You have to explain to that, that to them that that's how it's done, and then they just get really excited. Curating the tasting to their palate, that's very important. Just like you would curate a wine club, if you want to, grow your wine club, you need to curate that wine tasting to their palate. That is really important because the younger generation, it's a bit more difficult. They're just starting to enjoy wine, so you can't throw at them some really big, bold, big tannins, and not always, but you just need to have the conversation with them. That is really important.
Absolutely. How do you balance having that conversation and educating them about these wines without being overwhelming? That's usually the first thing I hear from somebody who's a little bit younger. Oh my God, it's so intimidating. How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. And that's really important to have staff who understand that sometimes someone does not want you to throw all kinds of knowledge at them. They just want to have a wonderful time. They want to simply know you, and they just want to know a few things about the building, let's just say the historical aspect of the building, or just a funny conversation about why do you say strawberry, is in the wine? Did they put strawberry in there? So you just have a funny conversation about it. But yeah, so very often it's best not to throw too much knowledge unless they ask. So you got to balance this out. That's really important. Or you're going to lose the customer. They're not going to purchase from you if you bore them to death with clones and soil types.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not just about the wine, right? I love that you brought up the point about being in a historic building. It was a brothel, I believe.
Right.
That helps build character and something easy to remember, right? Somebody will go out and say, "Oh my gosh, I did a wine tasting in a former brothel," right? I think that generation is looking for something more than just how the wine tastes.
You got to balance it out between saying, look, we have Philippe Malka here, Andy Erickson, Ellen Kaplinger, whoever, star winemaker. We use Pritchard Hill, Martinez, whatever, fancy vineyard. And then you got to light this whole thing up with fun facts, things that just makes them comfortable. Because you want them to learn about what, it makes you unique. But you also want to have fun. We all, when we're on vacation, we don't want we want to know about the place where the person you meet lives. So that's important. You have to have employees who enjoy having this kind of conversation.
I love that you said that. Employees who are knowledgeable about winemaking and who enjoy having this kind of conversation, it's very difficult to do. And we're going to come back to employee compensation and employees later on. But for now, thank you, Garrett. That was really helpful.
Thank you.
All right, so one other thing that we have been hearing might appeal to a younger generation is the advent of non-alcoholic wine or low ABV options. And it seems like more tasting rooms than before are embracing this to be a little bit more welcoming, particularly for millennial women right now. Hi, millennial woman. A lot of my friends are pregnant, and as much as they would love to drink wine, they can't. So having a non-alcoholic option helps them feel welcome. It builds goodwill toward the brand to be able to feel seen. And that's just one instance, right? Perhaps, somebody is is driving that day and doesn't want to consume anything, or they're sober for whatever reason. Maybe it's the boomer who has had to cut back on their alcohol consumption for their health. Having these sorts of options is one way to keep bringing them back into the tasting room, and we're seeing more wineries start to offer these.
Indeed, the lighter blue is the share of those that answered yes when asked if they do have a NA or low ABV option. And this, we didn't ask specifically about alcohol removed or alcohol-free wine. This was just an option that they could provide a guest. And I've heard different things from unfermented juice mixed with a little sparkling wine, like a cocktail type thing, just to show that again, we want to provide the same high-level hospitality to everyone who walks to the tasting room door, regardless of whether they're going to be drinking full-strength wine with us or not.
Is it terrible to think this is a great way to get kids if you have grape juice? If you have unfermented grape juice, to get them interested in wine and say, these are the grapes that we picked from these vines out here. Mm-hmm. But as many wineries start to look at more family-friendly options, right, that's where a lot of millennial Gen Xers are in their life. They maybe can't find a babysitter or bringing their kids with them on vacation. This could be a fun way to make it seem more family-friendly. Or even if it's just serving a Coke, right, or a Pepsi, whichever side of that debate you fall on, always is a nice touch to have something a little bit more welcoming.
Indeed, indeed. Now we're going to be taking a look at compensation in the tasting room for your key employees, for DTC employees. And as the stakes have gotten higher in terms of growing your own sales and the total U.S. market in terms of direct sales, a good tasting room employee has gotten that much more valuable. And you can see generally compensation has gone up across most of the key regions, and our survey found for the entire U.S. that both median hourly range, that's the lighter blue, and then the median per club sign-up bonus, both grew over 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't stress enough, and so too did Kelly and Garrett, how important it is to have employees that are engaged, invested, and willing to ask the open-ended question to get to know the consumer. It's really hard to find somebody like that. And paying them a living wage or appropriately is really the best way to keep them, especially now when we've had issues with inflation. There's a very negative view of the economy. There are concerns about the future of jobs. Making sure that that tasting room employee is compensated fairly is going to be the biggest thing that any winery can do to keep that employee around, because we all know it costs a lot more money to hire somebody than it does to actually keep them. It is interesting to see some decrease in the per club sign-up bonus, especially in Sonoma and the rest of California. For the most part, for the last few years, that has been on the incline. So I wonder if this is maybe just a little bit of a right sizing or what's happening there. But I wonder if that's also attributing to the fact that wine club conversions have been down as well.
Very possibly, and also with the decline of visitation, fewer visitors might mean less of a need for tasting rooms that were as staffed up as in previous years, particularly to serve some of those longer, higher engagement experiences that were so popular coming out of COVID. Our company also tracks winery hiring activity through the Wine Jobs Index, which is based on jobs posted to the site. We also have a new application index that provides data on both sides of the hiring equation, if if you will. And what we've seen, it's interesting, the DTC index, the sub-index, has trended lower than last year, which does show a lack of hiring activity relative to last year for the tasting room. But sales and marketing, that's been the one sub-index that has trended above the previous year. And that, to me, suggests that wineries continue to try to bolster their overall sales strategy while also trying to minimize costs in the tasting room. We're also been very excited to announce a new comp tracker in Wine Jobs. So you can search positions by pay range and find a wealth of information there in terms of salaries and pay that will help you hire or develop, a new program at your winery.
So that was the good news around tasting room employees. I hate to say it. Our next slide is a little bit more alarming, but more importantly, I want us to look at this realistically. We're looking at tasting room layoffs, and we're seeing quite a few wineries across regions have already made their cuts. We've heard stories about layoffs at some of the larger wineries. Again, some of the larger wineries have closed down tasting rooms, and that has made some national headlines. But as companies across the board, across industries, not just the wine industry, are hedging their bets for what's going to happen in the next few years, this is not all of that surprising. What is interesting is the number of wineries that are considering that they might do a layoff soon. What this question doesn't show is how big of a layoff. It could just be one person at your winery. Really, it looks like it's more of a right sizing. As we see tasting room visitation decrease a little bit, maybe we don't need as many employees in the room. This doesn't seem too frightening.
Indeed, and also given that there might be a change in the experiences being offered by wineries that would require perhaps fewer people providing those services.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to some of our last slides. What is the biggest issue facing tasting rooms in 2025? All of our data so far has looked back at last year and what was happening. Now, as we move forward, we want to look at what will be our challenges through the rest of 2025 and possibly into 2026. No surprises here. Almost everybody in California and even across the United States said that a lack of tourism is going to be an issue and a lack of interest from the younger demographic. But as you see, a lot of wineries have already made strides to try to capture that younger consumer, to try to put out great messaging about the wine region to get more tourists in. Brand saturation also rated highly, and that's not surprising as well. We have more than 11,000 wineries in the United States. How do you stand out against that? But what actually does kind of surprise me in the results of this, particularly from those wineries in California, is that they see government issues and regulatory permitting issues as not as much of an issue as a problem that they're going to be facing through the rest of the year. I know we talk so much about east of the Rockies, but they're doing some really cool things out there. And I know that we can't have weddings at Napa Valley or Sonoma wineries every weekend. That'd be great, but I see, permitting problems where trade tastings aren't allowed. Neighbors are getting upset about tasting room traffic. I kind of wonder if maybe in the next year we need to spend some time doing some more outreach to change that narrative with neighbors, with the local governments, to see what they can do to help us out. Because part of the lack of tourism is unfriendly neighbors or lack of ability to host events. Yeah.
It's going to be, this is on the terms of tourism, people visiting wine country, as someone mentioned already, Kelly, that, foreign visitation is down dramatically already. The wineries that we've spoken to who hosted, in places like Napa that host a high number of foreign visitors, they said, unfortunately, that those folks who did come said, we're only here because we booked the trip already, and they don't have much intention of coming back. So that's going to be a challenge. The economic worries is also a big challenge. And so this is what folks are also talking about, specifically what they see as a challenge in driving DTC business.
Yeah, nothing super surprising here. Again, anti-alcohol campaigns are getting stronger, finding the right staff members. High cost of living is one that we don't have much control over other than paying more, and as most smaller wineries will attest, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Again, nothing here is out of the ordinary or out of the blue, but it is something that we are continuing to watch. So I know that sounds like it was, kind of a negative way to end this, but it is important to be realistic about the future, right? The data suggests that there are some wins and there are some ways to capitalize on tasting rooms, bring in new guests and new customers. But we just have to be smart looking forward and into the future and work on the things that will make a big impact in our tasting rooms. So with that wraps our webinar for the day. I want to thank you for joining us. I especially want to thank Garrett and Kelly for joining us today, for all of their incredible insights, and for putting up with us asking questions about their business. I'd like to thank the Wine Business Analytics team again for providing all of this great information. And I can't wait to see you guys again next year.
Yeah, I agree. This has been great. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. And the survey report will be out in the July issue of Wine Business Monthly. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.